Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Fears family. Tonight, we're heading deep into the mist-soaked wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, a place where beauty hides something ancient, and the forest doesn't always give back what it takes. They say the trees here whisper when no one's around, that the fog moves like it's alive, and sometimes, if you stand still long enough, you can hear footsteps that aren't yours. But what's worse is when you see something you can't explain, like the man who vanished after hearing a voice call his name through the static of his truck's CB radio, or the hiker who found fresh footprints circling her tent, though she was camping miles from anyone. Tonight, we'll step into 7 true stories from the Pacific Northwest, stories told by real people who swore they'd never speak of what happened again, but they did. And now, their experiences will stay with you too. Some say these mountains hold spirits older than time. Others believe it's something else, something that waits, watches, and hunts. So, before we begin, turn off the lights, grab your headphones, and remember, out here in the endless dark, the forest listens back. Subscribe to Dark Fears, and let's begin. My name is Daniel, and this happened 3 years ago when I was working as a ranger in a remote section of the Olympic National Forest. It's the kind of place most tourists never see. Endless trees, fog that rolls in like smoke, and silence so thick it presses on your chest. I was assigned to a small outpost station about 20 miles from the nearest paved road. My only link to civilization was an old CB radio mounted beside my cot. At night, I'd sometimes pick up faint chatter from truckers or other rangers, nothing unusual. Until one evening, a voice came through I didn't recognize. It said my name, not Ranger Daniel, just Daniel. The voice was calm, distant, almost curious. I thought it was a prank. Maybe someone playing around on a nearby frequency. But when I asked who it was, the radio only hissed back. I didn't think much of it then. But the next night, it happened again. This time, whispering through static like someone standing right beside me. That's when I realized no one else was supposed to know I was out there. I tried to laugh it off that night, convincing myself it was just some random transmission bouncing off the mountains. The forest can play tricks on you. Sound travels strange out here. But as the night deepened, something about the air felt wrong. The stillness was too perfect. Around 2 a.m., the radio crackled again. Faint static, then silence, then that same voice. Only this time, it didn't say my name. It said, "Why are you here?" The question sliced through me. The voice wasn't mechanical like a radio tone. It was human, low, calm, and close. I froze, staring at the CB receiver. I picked up the mic and asked who it was. No response. Just a faint hiss, followed by what sounded like breathing. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. I looked outside through the narrow cabin window. The fog was so thick I couldn't see the tree line. But then I noticed something. The motion sensor light above my truck was on. That light only triggers when something moves within 15 feet of the cabin. I stepped outside, radio still in hand. The air was wet and cold, the fog swirling around like smoke. The sensor light buzzed faintly overhead. No footprints, no sound, no movement. But then, the radio in my hand hissed again, and I heard it whisper, "I can see you." I stumbled backward toward the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My pulse was racing, breath fogging up in the cold air. The forest was silent again. No birds, no crickets, not even the wind. Just that heavy stillness pressing against the glass. I turned off the CB, thinking it might be malfunctioning. But even unplugged, I could still hear faint static coming from it. That's impossible. The thing wasn't even connected to power. I wrapped the radio in a blanket and stuffed it inside my gear locker. Then I sat in silence, watching the minutes crawl by on my wristwatch. 3:17 a.m. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were wet, leading from the back door of the cabin toward the cot where I slept. Bare feet, human, fresh. The fog had seeped through the open crack under the door earlier, leaving the floor damp, so the prints stood out perfectly. There were 10 of them, and they stopped right beside my bed. I followed them slowly, flashlight trembling. They ended at the wall, as if the person who made them had simply walked into it, or through it. That's when I heard a faint, distorted voice again. But this time, not from the radio. It came from outside the window. "Daniel, let me in." I didn't move. My flashlight beam trembled across the window. The fog outside glowed pale from the cabin light, but beyond that, nothing. No figure, no face. Just that chilling voice again, soft and broken. "Please, Daniel. It's cold." My mouth went dry. The nearest ranger station was 20 miles away, and no one else was scheduled for patrol. Still, part of me wanted to believe it was a hiker who got lost. Against every instinct screaming at me, I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then, slow scraping along the wall outside, like fingernails dragging on wood. The sound circled the cabin. My flashlight flickered again. I backed toward the CB locker, heart pounding. Then something hit the window, just once, loud enough to rattle the glass. I jumped back. A faint handprint appeared on the fogged pane, bare, human, and reversed, like someone pressed their palm from inside. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner with my rifle and the lantern burning until sunrise finally pushed the fog away. When I stepped outside, there were no tracks. None. Not even the ones that should have been mine. The following day, I tried to rationalize everything. Fatigue, stress, maybe even a small gas leak causing hallucinations. Anything but what I thought I'd experienced. I checked the radio, still silent, still unplugged. By afternoon, I decided to hike toward the old service road just to clear my head. The air was crisp, and the forest strangely quiet. Halfway down the trail, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a park ranger badge, half buried in the dirt, rusted but readable. The name tag said, Daniel Carter, my full name. Except I'd lost my badge months ago in a completely different section of the forest. I remember searching for hours and finally reporting it missing. I picked it up, but it was ice cold, far colder than the air. Then, faintly from my handheld radio, came a distorted burst of static. I froze. Then, in that same soft voice, "You dropped this." I looked around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just endless pine trees swaying slightly in the wind. I turned and hurried back toward the cabin, the voice still whispering faintly through the static behind me. When I reached the porch, I noticed the door was wide open. And inside, the radio I'd locked away was sitting on the table, plugged in. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't left that radio out. The power cord was stretched across the floor, plugged back into the wall. The blanket I'd wrapped around it was neatly folded on my cot. I whispered to myself, "Someone's been in here." The mic clicked twice on its own. Then the voice came back, soft, calm, like before. "Daniel, you're not supposed to be here." I demanded to know who they were, what they wanted. My voice cracked. Static filled the cabin, rising and falling like slow breathing. Then another sound underneath it. Faint shuffling, wet and heavy, moving toward the cabin from outside. I grabbed my rifle and aimed at the door. The shuffling stopped. Then, 3 knocks, I shouted. Identify yourself. No answer. 3 knocks again. I stepped closer, barrel trembling, every nerve in my body screaming. When I pulled open the door, nothing, just fog. Then I heard it again, breathing, but not from outside. It was coming from behind me. I spun around and saw the CB mic hovering slightly off the table, as if something invisible was holding it. The cable twisted in the air like a snake before falling limp. Then, a whisper. You shouldn't have answered. I fired. The shot echoed through the cabin and into the woods. Splinters exploded from the wall, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. When I looked back, the radio was off. Dead silent. I didn't sleep that night either. By dawn, I packed my things and radioed Central Command to request a pickup. No answer. Just static. I started the hike back myself. The trail looked different. Narrower somehow, darker. I kept checking my GPS. The coordinates said I was moving in circles, even though I was walking in a straight line. The fog thickened again, and then I saw movement. Something tall and thin walking parallel to me between the trees. Too smooth to be human. Every few seconds it disappeared behind trunks and reappeared closer. I picked up my pace, heart pounding. Then my handheld radio crackled softly in my backpack. You can't leave yet, Daniel. I ran. I didn't care about directions anymore. I just ran until my lungs burned. The fog grew thicker, swallowing everything. At some point, the forest fell silent again. When I finally stopped, I realized I'd stumbled into an open clearing. In the center stood a wooden radio tower, old and half collapsed. The metal antenna hung by a single wire, swaying slowly. On the tower's base was a sign so faded I could barely read it. Station 3, decommissioned 1998. That didn't make sense. My map didn't show any old station here. I climbed the steps cautiously. Inside the cabin at the top was a desk with an even older CB radio. Dust covered everything. But the radio was humming softly. I reached out and turned the dial. Instantly, my own voice came through the speaker. A recording of me. Panicked, whispering, "If anyone finds this, please tell them I didn't imagine it." Then, overlapping my voice, the other one spoke again. "We told you not to come back." The door slammed behind me. I spun and tried the door. It was jammed. My pulse thundered in my ears. The old radio screeched with feedback, then went silent again. The air felt heavier inside, colder. Then, faintly through the static, came the sound of someone walking up the steps outside. Each creak of the wooden stair echoed up through the floorboards. I backed into a corner, gripping my rifle. Shadows shifted under the doorframe. Then the knob began to turn. The door opened just a crack, enough for me to see fog spill in like smoke. No one was there. Then the radio turned itself on again. The voice, calm and close. "You shouldn't have heard the others, Daniel," I shouted. "Who are you?" The static deepened into a low growl. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw a reflection in the window. Me, but standing outside, smiling back. When I blinked, it was gone. The tower suddenly shook violently. The floorboards cracked. I grabbed my bag and leapt out through the open window into the fog. I landed hard, rolled, and kept running until my legs gave out. When I woke, the fog was gone. Sunlight filtered weakly through the trees. I had no idea how far I'd run or how long I'd been out. My radio was smashed. The screen cracked. I made it back to the ranger base 2 days later. The others thought I'd gotten lost. My supervisor said no one had been assigned to my area that week. The entire outpost was closed for maintenance. They didn't believe a word I said about the voice, the footprints, or the tower. But a few days later, one of the senior officers pulled me aside. He told me something that's haunted me ever since. That same sector of the forest had a ranger posted there in 1998, also named Daniel Carter. He went missing after reporting strange transmissions from a decommissioned tower. His body was never found. Now, every night when I try to sleep, I still hear faint static somewhere in the room. Sometimes it whispers my name, calm and curious. And sometimes it asks again, "Why are you here?" My name is Elena, and I've worked as a wildlife photographer for over a decade. I've camped in deserts, swamps, and frozen tundras. But nowhere unsettled me like Mount Rainier's northern ridge. It was late autumn, just before the snows sealed off the higher trails. I was out there alone, scouting elk routes for a winter project. My last stop was an old fire trail that locals called Rainier Ridge, though most hikers avoided it. They said the map was wrong there, that sometimes the path changed. I shrugged it off as mountain myth. But on my second night, as I hiked deeper, I noticed something odd. My GPS coordinates looped back to the same point no matter how far I walked. Then, out of the fog, I saw light. A cabin, half hidden behind thick pine trunks. Smoke curled from the chimney. That shouldn't have been possible. There were no marked structures for miles. I thought maybe it was a ranger's shelter or an old hermit's place. My phone showed no signal, and the temperature was dropping fast, so I decided to knock. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the fire was burning. A kettle steamed quietly on the stove. But the cabin was completely empty. I stepped inside slowly, calling out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. The cabin was cozy but old. Wooden floorboards, a single chair, an oil lamp flickering faintly on the table. The kettle whistled softly, just enough to make the air feel alive. Someone had clearly been here only minutes ago. On the wall above the fireplace hung a photograph, faded black and white. It showed a woman standing in front of the same cabin, except the trees behind her were younger, barely saplings. The year etched at the bottom read 1926. Then something shifted. The cabin door slammed shut behind me, though there had been no wind. I ran to open it again, but outside, the world looked different. The sky was darker, the fog thicker. My campsite that should have been visible from the ridge, gone. I shouted again, but the only reply was my own echo, distorted. That's when I heard it, a low hum, almost mechanical, coming from beneath the cabin floor. I lifted the rug near the center. There was a hatch door, locked from the outside. Scratches covered the wood, deep and frantic, like someone had clawed to get out. Then, faintly, I heard tapping from below. 3 slow knocks, and a voice, distant, muffled. "Is it night already?" I froze. My instinct screamed to leave, but something about that voice, it didn't sound threatening. It sounded confused. "Who's down there?" I asked, my voice trembling. No answer, just that same slow tapping. I backed away and tried the door again. It wouldn't budge. The windows, too, solid, nailed shut. Then I smelled something strange, like burnt metal and damp earth. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, turning into a low vibration. The whole cabin seemed to breathe, wood creaking in rhythm. Then, suddenly, silence. The oil lamp flickered out, plunging everything into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, but when I turned it on, the cabin interior looked wrong. The photo on the wall was missing. The furniture had changed, older, dustier, like the place had aged 50 years in seconds. And where the hatch had been, nothing, just solid floorboards. I stumbled back, panic rising, when I saw movement in the corner. A shadow stood there, faint and still. "Who's there?" I whispered. The figure didn't move. Then slowly, it tilted its head. And I realized there was no reflection in its eyes. The shadow stepped forward, and I stumbled back toward the door. My light shook across its face. It wasn't a person, or at least not anymore. The skin was grayish, the eyes hollow, reflecting nothing. Its mouth opened slightly, and a faint sound escaped, like air escaping from a cracked pipe. Then it whispered, "It's too late for you now." I lunged for the door, slamming my shoulder against it. It gave way on the third hit. I burst outside, gasping in cold air, and spun around. The cabin was gone. All that stood behind me was a clearing of frost-covered ground. Not a single footprint or trace of the building. Even the smoke I'd seen earlier had vanished into thin air. I turned in circles, my flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing but trees. I ran down the trail, but the landscape twisted. Paths turning back on themselves, ridges leading nowhere. My compass needle spun wildly. Then, in the distance, I saw it again. The same cabin light flickering faintly through the fog, in a different direction this time. And a voice drifting through the wind. "You shouldn't have come alone." I forced myself to keep walking toward the light, half believing I was losing my mind. My breath came out in heavy clouds, and every step felt heavier. The forest grew unnaturally quiet again. Even the crunch of my boots sounded muted. When I reached the light source, I saw the cabin once more, exactly as before. Fire glowing inside, door ajar. But this time, something was different. Hanging from the porch beam was a wind chime made from small bones. They clinked softly as the fog brushed past. I hesitated at the doorway. Inside, the kettle was boiling again. The photo was back on the wall, but now the woman in it was standing next to me. I felt my heart freeze. I spun around. The room was empty, but I could smell something. Faint lavender perfume mixed with smoke. Then the kettle whistled louder. I turned toward it, and for the briefest second, I saw someone's reflection in the metal surface. A woman, standing right behind me, eyes white, mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. When I spun, she was gone, but her voice whispered in my ear, "You came when the mountain called. Now, you'll stay when it sleeps." The next thing I remember is waking on the cabin floor, daylight filtering through the cracks. My flashlight was dead. My camera bag was gone. When I stepped outside, the air felt heavy, like the atmosphere itself was thicker. The forest looked the same, but quieter, lifeless. Then I saw tracks leading away from the cabin. Bare human footprints, small, like a woman's. They led uphill toward the ridge. I followed them cautiously, my gut twisted in dread. The prints continued through mud, over roots, until they stopped abruptly at the cliff's edge. Below, a sheer drop into fog. And right there, on a rock ledge, sat my camera. The lens was cracked, but still powered on. I scrolled through the photos, mostly landscape shots, elk, trees, until the last one made my skin crawl. It was the cabin, but from outside, taken at night. In the window, I could see a woman's face staring out, and standing next to her was me. I dropped the camera and backed away. My pulse pounded so hard it made my ears ring. There was no logical explanation for that photo. I was alone out there. I turned and ran back down the ridge, desperate to find the trailhead. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon something new. Another cabin, identical to the first. Everything was in the same place. The chair, the lamp, the photograph. Only this time, the woman in the photo was smiling wider. Her eyes had changed. They were now looking directly at me. The kettle began to whistle again. I didn't move. I just stared, frozen in horror, as the door slowly began to close on its own. Before it shut completely, I heard a single whisper from inside. "Welcome back." The next thing I knew, everything went black. When I woke, it was dark again. My hands were shaking, my flashlight gone. The only light came from the fire in the cabin. But something about it was off. The flames burned blue. I could hear faint voices whispering around me, overlapping and distorted, like radio static turned into human sound. The whispers grew louder until one of them spoke clearly. "You took her picture. Now she takes yours," and the camera sat on the table, powered on. On its screen was a live view of me. But the image showed something different. The cabin was older again, rotted, and behind me stood several shadowy figures. I turned. Nothing. The figures in the screen moved closer. I screamed and threw the camera into the fire. The whispers stopped instantly. The fire went out, leaving me in pitch black. Then, a single sound. A camera shutter clicking. But there was no camera left. I ran into the woods, tripping over roots and stones. The fog swallowed everything again, cold and endless. I shouted until my throat burned. Finally, I saw light, not cabin light, but headlights. A ranger truck. 2 rangers found me wandering barefoot near the old ridge road. They said I was pale, disoriented, mumbling about the woman in the cabin. When I asked them to follow me back, they exchanged glances. One said quietly, "There hasn't been a cabin on Rainier Ridge in over 70 years." He showed me a black and white photo from a local archive. It was the same cabin, burned down in 1926 after a lightning strike. The woman who lived there had vanished. Her name, Elena Carter. My name. I didn't believe him at first, until he showed me the back of the photo. The date written there matched the one from the picture inside the cabin. And beneath it, in faded ink, were the words, "She came when the mountain called." It's been 6 months since that night. I don't go into the woods anymore. I moved to the city, far from mountains, fog, and silence. But some nights, when the wind howls through the alleyways, I hear that faint metallic chime again. Bones knocking softly together. Last week, a small package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was the cabin. Restored, bright, alive, just as I'd seen it the first night. Smoke curling from the chimney, fog rolling through the trees. And standing in front of it, smiling, was me. Same pose as the woman from 1926. On the back of the photo, written in perfect cursive, were 5 words. "It's night again, isn't it?" Since then, every mirror in my apartment shows something behind me. Faint at first, then clearer each night. A flicker of firelight, a shadow of the cabin. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I smell lavender and smoke. My name is Mara, and I used to live in a small town in Washington near the Skokomish River. There's an old bridge there, a rusted steel structure the locals call the Crying Bridge. My dad told me that back in the 70s, a school bus veered off the side and sank into the river below. Every winter, when the water level drops, you can still see the roof of the bus through the current. I never believed the stories people told about it. About the screams you could hear at night, or the shadows that sometimes moved under the surface. That is, until I crossed it one November evening, coming home from my night shift. The fog was thick, swallowing the headlights as my tires thudded over the metal planks. Halfway across, my car stalled. Lights flickered, engine dead. I cursed, turning the key again and again. That's when I heard it, a faint, wet tapping on the underside of the bridge. At first, I thought it was the river hitting the steel beams, but the tapping grew faster, closer, almost like hands. I stepped out of the car, the cold air cutting through my jacket. The river below was silent, completely still. And then, from beneath the bridge, something whispered my name. I froze on the bridge, my breath clouding in the cold air. The whisper was soft, almost childlike. It drifted up through the metal grates, echoing faintly off the steel beams. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. Mara. The sound came from directly below me. I leaned over the edge, peering down at the dark water. It rippled once, then went still. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Suddenly, something splashed. A large shape moved beneath the surface, pale, almost human. But the proportions were wrong. Too long, too thin. I stumbled back toward my car, fumbling for my phone. No signal, just a blinking, no service icon mocking me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sat there shaking. Then, the car's interior lights flickered on by themselves. I turned toward the passenger seat. The window was fogging from the inside, as if someone was breathing against the glass. A wet handprint appeared, fingers long and crooked, dragging slowly downward. That's when I saw movement in the rearview mirror. A pale, waterlogged face stared back from the back seat. Eyes open wide, black water dripping from its mouth. I screamed and threw open the door, tumbling onto the freezing bridge. My keys clattered across the metal. I didn't even look back. I just ran. The fog was so thick that within seconds, I couldn't even see my car. The sound of water slapping against the bridge returned, faster this time. And beneath it, I heard something crawling. It wasn't footsteps. It was a wet, dragging noise, like something pulling itself forward. I ran toward the end of the bridge, but the fog made everything feel endless. My flashlight flickered across the metal, and then I saw it. Something was climbing up from under the bridge. Long arms, thin as branches, ending in bony fingers that scraped against the steel. Its skin glistened with river slime, face pale and warped, like it had drowned long ago. I ran faster, lungs burning. Behind me it hissed, a low, gurgling sound that made my stomach twist. When I finally reached solid ground, I turned around, and the fog was clear again. My car was gone. The bridge looked empty, quiet. But down below, in the water, I could still hear faint tapping, like knuckles against metal. By morning, I convinced myself I'd hallucinated from exhaustion. Maybe I fell asleep in the car. Maybe my mind filled in the blanks. But that illusion vanished when I went back the next day with a friend, Eli, a local cop. When we reached the bridge, he gave me a strange look. "Your car's still here," he said. Sure enough, it was parked right in the middle, engine cold, door wide open. But something was off. The windows were shattered from the inside, and the interior smelled like river water and rot. Eli crouched by the guardrail, shining his flashlight down at the water. "You said something grabbed the bridge?" he asked. I nodded. He pointed at the beams below. Deep gouges marked the steel, like long fingers had dug into it. We left immediately. But that night, Eli called me, his voice shaking. "Mara." I went back alone to file the report. "The river, it's full of bubbles, like something's moving down there, and I swear, I saw faces." He hung up before I could reply. By morning, they said Eli was missing. His patrol car was found near the bridge, empty. For the next few nights, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that tapping sound again. Steady, rhythmic, like knuckles against metal. Then one night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. When I answered, all I heard was river noise, and under it, Eli's voice, whispering, "Don't come back." The line went dead. I went to the police, but they didn't believe me. They said Eli had probably fallen in and been swept away. But the Skokomish doesn't move that fast in winter. I knew something else took him. That weekend, I drove out there one last time. I don't even know why. Guilt, maybe, or the need for closure. The fog was even thicker now, the air colder than before. I stopped just before the bridge and walked the rest of the way. Halfway across, I saw wet footprints leading toward the middle, bare, human. They stopped right where my car had stalled before. And there, rising slowly from the water, was Eli. His eyes were open. His skin was pale blue. And as he looked up at me, his mouth opened wide, letting out that same wet tapping sound I'd heard beneath the bridge. I ran, screaming, all the way back to the road. But when I looked back, Eli was gone. The water rippled once, then went still again. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told no one. But that tapping, it followed me. I'd hear it in my house, in my car, sometimes even in the shower, like it was coming from beneath me. Then one night, I woke up to find my bedroom floor wet. My feet sank into icy water, barely an inch deep, spreading across the room. My phone buzzed beside me, screen glowing. A text from Eli's number. Just 2 words. "It's waiting." I dropped the phone, backing away as water trickled under my bed. That's when the tapping started again, loud this time, metallic, echoing from below the floorboards. I ran outside barefoot, gasping in the cold. My house sat miles from the river. There was no reason for it to be wet. But as I looked down the dirt road toward town, I saw the fog rolling in, thick and heavy, crawling along the ground. And through it, faintly, came that whisper again. "Mara." The fog thickened as it reached my porch, swirling like it was alive. I stood frozen, too terrified to move. The sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere nearby. Slow, deliberate. I turned toward the end of the driveway and saw something standing in the mist. A shape, human-sized, motionless. I couldn't see its face, but its head tilted unnaturally, as if bones were bending where they shouldn't. It began to move toward me, step by wet step, the sound of water sloshing with each footfall. I stumbled back into the house, slamming the door and locking it. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. Then came the tapping again, this time against the front door. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the signal flickered. The screen froze, and through the speaker, I heard river sounds. And beneath that, Eli's voice, faint but clear. "Mara, you shouldn't have gone back." My phone screen turned black, and on the reflection of the glass, I saw a wet, pale face behind me. When I spun around, nothing. Just the dripping sound again. From the ceiling, water began dripping from the ceiling above me. Slow, heavy drops splattering onto the floor. I stared up and saw the plaster bulging, dark and soaked. The tapping sound was coming from inside the ceiling. Step by step, I backed away, but the ceiling suddenly cracked. A pale, bloated hand punched through dripping river water. Another hand followed, clawing through the wood like it was paper. I ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. My hand slipped on the wet handle as the thing dropped from the ceiling behind me. A loud, sickening thud. The smell of rot filled the air. I turned just long enough to see what used to be Eli. His body twisted and broken, skin stretched thin and gray. His mouth opened unnaturally wide, releasing that horrible tapping sound, not from his tongue, but from his teeth chattering violently together. He began crawling toward me, water pooling beneath him. I grabbed the nearest thing, a metal poker from the fireplace, and swung it hard. It went straight through him. He burst apart like mist. And then the water vanished. I was alone. The floor was dry. The lights flickered once, then steadied. But outside, the fog was still waiting. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. Didn't even lock the door. I just drove until the fog disappeared in my rearview mirror. For a while, I thought I was free. I moved 2 towns over, changed jobs, tried to forget. But it's like the bridge never left me. Sometimes when it rains, I can smell that same rot. Sometimes I wake up to find wet footprints leading from my door to my bed. And then last week, I got another text. Same number. No words this time, just a photo. It was me, standing on the bridge, looking down into the water. Except I never went back. I showed the picture to a coworker, but when they looked, it was just static. I thought maybe I was losing it, until I played back the security footage from outside my apartment that night. At 3:14 a.m., the fog rolled in thick across the street. A shadow appeared near the door, long arms, dripping wet. And then, clear as day, the tapping began again. I haven't slept since. It's been 3 nights now. I can hear the river through my walls, like it's flowing inside the house. Every hour, that tapping grows louder. I've tried everything. Moved furniture, checked the pipes, even tore open part of the floor. There's nothing there, just cold air and a faint smell of moss. Tonight, I decided to record it. I set my phone by the floor, hit record, and left the room. When I played it back an hour later, I expected silence. Instead, I heard my own voice whispering, "Why are you here?" My breath caught. That's what it said to me on the bridge. Then, at the end of the recording, a faint splash, and a voice, wet and broken, whispering from the speaker, "Come back to the bridge, Mara. We're waiting." I threw the phone into the sink and turned on the water full blast, trying to drown out the sound. But even through the rushing tap, I could still hear it tapping beneath the metal. I don't know what it wants. Maybe it's calling me home. If anyone finds this recording, stay away from the crying bridge, because once you hear your name in the water, it never forgets you. My name is Logan, and I used to work as a backcountry surveyor in the Cascade Mountains. I've seen some strange things out there. Old mines, collapsed hunting cabins, even plane wreckage. But nothing haunts me more than what I found, or rather, what found me, near a place called Elder's Ridge. In 2019, I was sent to log new terrain coordinates deep in the forest. I set up camp by a small creek and followed the GPS grid uphill. About an hour in, I stumbled across something that wasn't on any map. A wooden cabin hidden behind thick pines. It looked old, but not abandoned. There was smoke coming from the chimney, faint but real. I called out, thinking maybe a hunter or hermit lived there. No answer. I knocked on the door. It swung open slowly on its own, creaking like it hadn't moved in years. Inside, the air was warm. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. But there were no footprints, no dishes, no tools. Just a single rocking chair, moving back and forth, as if someone had just stood up. The strangest part? My GPS had frozen. The coordinates wouldn't move. I turned to leave and saw, carved into the doorframe from the inside, 3 words burned into the wood. Don't look back. I stepped back from the doorway, my instinct screaming to leave. But the surveyor in me, the part trained to document everything, hesitated. I took out my camera and snapped a few pictures. That's when I noticed something disturbing. Each photo came out darker than the one before. The last one was nearly black, except for the faint outline of a figure standing by the rocking chair. But when I looked up from the camera, the chair was empty again. I decided to head back to camp, marking the location in my notebook since the GPS was useless. The forest around me felt heavier than before. Sound didn't travel right. My own footsteps seemed muffled. Halfway down the hill, I realized I'd been walking in circles. I could see my own boot prints overlapping, leading me right back toward the cabin. By then, the daylight was fading fast. I stopped to get my bearings, when suddenly, a voice whispered behind me. You weren't supposed to find it. I turned, flashlight beam cutting through the trees, nothing there, just fog rolling low between the trunks. But when I looked down again, new footprints had appeared beside mine, bare, wet, and facing me. Panic set in. I started running downhill, trying to follow the sound of the creek. My breath came out in white bursts. Every few seconds, I'd glance back, half expecting someone to be following me. But no matter how far I ran, I kept passing the same landmarks. A split tree trunk, a moss-covered boulder, and then the cabin again. It shouldn't have been possible. I'd been running in a straight line. The door was still open. The fire inside burned higher now, brighter, almost inviting. And above the doorframe, where the words had been carved, new ones had appeared beneath them. You looked back. I stumbled away, heart pounding. My head felt light, like the air itself was thinner here. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling. Then I heard movement from inside the cabin. Slow footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Someone, or something, was walking toward the door. I didn't wait to see it. I ran again, not caring which direction. Branches cut my face. Fog swallowed my flashlight beam. When I finally stopped, gasping for air, I looked behind me, and the cabin was gone. But in the distance, through the trees, I could still see the faint glow of the fire. I camped under a ridge that night, too scared to move. I didn't make a fire. I didn't sleep. Every sound in the woods made my skin crawl. Around 3 a.m., I heard whispering again. Faint, overlapping voices all around me, repeating the same phrase over and over. Don't look back, don't look back, don't look back. I covered my ears and shut my eyes, but it didn't stop. It got louder until I screamed into the darkness for it to stop. And it did. Instant silence. Not even wind. When I opened my eyes, there was a dim orange light flickering between the trees ahead. The cabin again. I could see it, closer than ever. Fire blazing through the windows. But this time, there were shadows moving inside. Dozens of them. Their forms distorted, flickering in and out like static. One by one, they turned toward the door. Toward me. I grabbed my pack and ran without looking back once. I didn't care if I was lost anymore. I just wanted out. When the first light of dawn hit the mountains, I finally saw the main logging road. Civilization. But when I turned to take one last look at the forest, there was no cabin, no smoke, nothing. Just endless trees and silence. 2 days later, I reported what happened to my supervisor. I told him about the cabin, the voices, the strange loop I'd been trapped in. He laughed it off, said I'd probably suffered from isolation stress or dehydration. But when I showed him the photos, his face changed. He zoomed in on the last image, the dark one with the outline by the chair. There was no mistake. The figure standing there had my face. He arranged a follow-up trip, saying he'd send me back with a ranger to verify. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished, that the cabin wasn't done with me. The ranger, Tom Keller, was a local who'd spent 20 years in those woods. As we hiked toward Elder's Ridge, I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He just nodded quietly and said, "You're not the first to talk about a cabin that moves." That froze me. "What do you mean?" I asked. He told me about reports dating back to the 1960s, hunters, hikers, even a rescue team once, all claiming to find a cabin in different spots, never in the same place twice. And everyone who entered it, even briefly, came back changed. By the time we reached the ridge, clouds had rolled in and snow had started to fall. That's when I saw smoke again, curling up between the trees. The smoke led us straight to it. The same cabin, same broken steps, same dark wood. Only this time, it looked newer. The roof wasn't sagging. The windows were clear. The rocking chair inside was still. Tom stared for a long moment, then muttered, "This wasn't here last season." I pulled out my phone to take another picture, and it immediately powered off. Battery full, but screen black. Tom walked closer, pressing a hand to the wall. "It's warm," he said quietly, "like it's alive." Before I could stop him, he stepped inside. I waited. A minute passed, then 5. Finally, I called out, "Tom?" No answer. I circled around the cabin, checked the windows, empty. Just the chair again, but now it was rocking. I shouted louder. My voice echoed weirdly, like it was being swallowed by the trees, when I finally stepped inside. The cabin was cold, the fire was gone, the air was stale. And Tom, he wasn't there. His footprints ended right inside the doorway. That's when I saw something on the wall beside me. A carved message, still wet and dark from fresh burn marks. "You brought him." I stumbled out into the snow, shouting his name. Nothing. Only my own voice bouncing back from the trees. I grabbed my radio. Static. I tried my backup GPS. Frozen again. Same gridlock as before. Then faintly, through the static, "Logan, leave." It was Tom's voice. I spun around, scanning the woods. His voice came again, softer now, fading in and out like a bad transmission. "It's not a place. It's a door." Then silence. I stared at the cabin. The windows were now completely black, as if covered from inside. Snow was falling heavier, and I could feel the air vibrating like a deep hum beneath the ground. I backed away, terrified, and that's when I noticed my footprints in the snow weren't leading away. They were looping back toward the door, over and over again. No matter where I moved, I ended up standing in the same spot, facing that door. I screamed in frustration and threw a rock at it. The door slammed open instantly, wind rushing out so cold it burned my skin. Inside, the fire was burning again, but now there were 2 chairs, both rocking. The storm hit hard. I could barely see. I covered my face and ran, anywhere away from that place. I followed the creek again, trusting it to lead me down. But as I moved, something strange began to happen. The trees started to repeat. The same patterns of branches, the same fallen logs. It was like the forest itself was folding. I stumbled, fell to my knees, and found something half buried in the snow. A boot. Tom's boot. Inside it, still attached, was part of his pant leg, torn clean off. I wanted to vomit, but then I heard the creaking. That slow, rhythmic sound again. Wood bending under weight, the rocking chairs. Even though the cabin wasn't there anymore, I could hear it. Louder, closer. The snow around me began to move, swirling like it was alive. In the white haze, shapes started to form, faint human silhouettes, all facing me. And one of them was me. It smiled, my smile, and whispered, "You looked back again." The sound hit me like a wave, echoing in every direction. I covered my ears and screamed. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the roadside, 10 miles from where I'd last been. My gear was gone, my camera smashed. It was morning, clear and calm, as if nothing had happened. A ranger truck pulled up minutes later. The officer recognized me and said they'd been searching all night. But not for me. They were looking for Tom Keller, who'd gone missing on patrol. When I told them what happened, they exchanged looks, then quietly drove me back to base. A week later, they found a cabin in the woods near Elder's Ridge, burned to the ground. Inside the ash, they recovered only one thing intact: a charred metal nameplate from a park ranger uniform. It read, T. Keller. But when I looked at the photos of the site, my blood ran cold. Because behind the ashes, in the tree line, faintly visible through the smoke, was a cabin, perfectly intact. The same one. I quit my job soon after. I moved across the country, far from any forest. But the cabin didn't stay behind. Every few months, I get an email. No sender, no subject. Just an attached photo. Always of a different forest, always the same cabin, always at dusk. Sometimes I see movement in the windows, sometimes the rocking chair. Once, a man's face. The last one came yesterday. This time, the cabin wasn't in a forest. It was in a parking lot, the one right outside my apartment. And through the open door, I could see 2 chairs, both rocking. And on the wall behind them, new words burned into the wood. Welcome home. My name is Elliot James, and what happened to me near Raven's Peak still keeps me awake most nights. I used to work for the Forest Service, mostly maintaining lookout posts across Oregon's mountain range. Raven's Peak was one of those remote stations, isolated, high above the tree line, where the wind never stopped screaming. They sent me there one fall after a storm damaged the camera tower. It was a simple assignment. Fix the wiring, check the signal relay, and return in 3 days. But from the moment I arrived, something felt off. The cabin's windows were covered from the inside, all of them nailed shut with plywood. The main door hung slightly open, like someone had left in a hurry. Inside, dust coated everything except the radio desk. That part was spotless. The logbook on the table had one fresh entry from 3 days ago. He's still outside. I froze. There hadn't been any other personnel assigned here that month. The wind howled again, long and hollow, and for a moment I thought I heard another sound underneath it, a slow, steady breathing. Coming from behind the cabin, I walked out carefully, flashlight shaking in my hand. The mountain was dead quiet, except for the wind scraping through pine. No footprints, no movement, nothing. I circled around the back and found the tower ladder swaying in the wind. That's when I saw it. A pair of boot prints in the mud, leading toward the trees, but stopping halfway, as if the person had just vanished. I climbed up the tower to inspect the camera array, but halfway up I froze. Across the ridge, maybe a quarter mile away, stood a figure, perfectly still, facing me. I blinked, gone. I forced myself to keep working, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. The radio inside crackled a few times, but no one spoke. By nightfall, fog rolled in, thick and heavy. The world outside disappeared into white. I made some coffee and tried to read through the old reports in the logbook. Most were normal patrol notes. But then, near the end, a scribble caught my attention. He's getting closer. Do not look directly. Raven doesn't want to be seen. A gust slammed the cabin door shut. When I looked up, there was a shape in the window. It wasn't my reflection. I backed up, heart pounding. The window was still boarded from the inside. I checked earlier. So whatever I saw had to be behind the boards. The sound of breathing returned, deeper this time, dragging and wet. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the window slats. Dust drifted, but something moved behind them. A faint scraping sound followed, like nails on wood. Then, 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, but then came the voice. Let me in. It's cold. It sounded like me, my own voice, coming from outside. I bolted for the radio, fumbling to call the base. Static, I tried again. Same thing. Finally, through the static, I heard someone whisper, "Don't answer him." I froze. The board started to creak. When I looked back, there was a long black hand reaching through a crack in the wood. Pale fingers, too thin, too long. I stumbled back, knocked over the chair, and the light flickered out. For the next hour, I sat in silence, clutching my knife, listening to the breathing fade, and then return. The following morning, the fog still hadn't lifted. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper again, my own voice, repeating, "It's cold." I stepped outside to check the perimeter. The ground was soaked, but there were no tracks, no sign of anything. Except for one thing. On the metal of the tower ladder, fresh scratches had been carved, long claw marks, as if something had tried to climb but slipped. I went back inside and started packing. Screw the assignment, I'd hike back down myself. But when I opened the cabin door, my footprints from yesterday were gone. The entire ground around the cabin was smooth, untouched. Then, faintly, I heard it again, that low breathing. I turned toward the tower, and standing beside it, in the fog, was a tall, thin shape. No features, just darkness. It tilted its head, and I felt pressure behind my eyes, like something was forcing its way into my head. The radio crackled again. "Don't look at him. Keep your head down." The voice this time wasn't mine. I didn't question the voice. I shut my eyes, crouched low, and backed toward the door. Every instinct screamed to run, but the air around me was alive, humming, vibrating with some low frequency that made my teeth ache. When I finally slammed the door shut behind me, the sound stopped. I turned the radio on again. Nothing. The voice was gone. Hours passed. I didn't move, didn't eat. Just sat, watching the door. At sunset, something new appeared. A faint tapping sound on the roof, light, rhythmic, almost like footsteps pacing slowly above me. Then came the whisper, softer this time. He climbed too high. I looked at the ceiling and saw something dripping through the boards. Dark liquid. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed upward. The beam caught movement, a pale, emaciated figure crawling upside down along the rafters, limbs bent the wrong way, head twitching with each movement. When it turned to face me, I realized it wasn't a man at all. Its face was smooth, no eyes, no mouth, yet I could hear it whispering inside my mind. I screamed and threw the lantern. The roof caught fire instantly. The flames spread faster than I thought possible. Dry wood and years of dust turned the cabin into a torch. I ran out into the fog, gasping for air, watching the lookout tower vanish behind waves of smoke. The air was filled with that low humming again, deep, almost mechanical. The fog pulsed with light. Then, faintly, shapes began to form in it. Tall, thin silhouettes, dozens of them, all facing the cabin. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They just watched. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, when one of the shapes suddenly broke apart into black mist and reformed inches away. I could feel the cold radiating from it, like standing inside a freezer. A whisper brushed past my ear. You looked again. And then pain, searing, white-hot pain behind my eyes. My vision split, double images flickering like static. I could see the cabin burning, and at the same time, see it untouched, brand new, glowing faintly blue from within. Two versions. Two worlds. And in both, he was watching me. I ran down the slope, half blind, until the trees thickened. The fog thinned slightly, but the air was still charged. Every few steps, I caught glimpses of faces, half-formed, floating just out of sight. By the time night fell, I'd reached an old ranger trail. My phone had service again, 1%. I called for help, but before anyone could answer, my phone froze. A photo app opened on its own. It showed a picture I hadn't taken. Me, standing beside the cabin. But in the photo, my face was turned completely toward the camera, and someone else was standing behind me. It wasn't human. Its limbs bent like broken branches, and where its face should have been, there was only a hollow void. I dropped the phone. The forest fell silent again. Then, somewhere far above, I heard the tower collapse. When the echo faded, I realized something else. The fog was rising again, fast. It was coming uphill. I turned and ran. I don't remember falling. One moment I was running, the next I was lying on wet moss staring at the stars. The fog had stopped. The forest was quiet again. I checked my watch, 4:12 a.m. I'd been running for hours. I forced myself up and walked until dawn. When I finally reached the ranger base, I collapsed at the door. The medics found me half-conscious, dehydrated, mumbling about the Watcher. They didn't believe me, of course. The official report said I suffered from exposure and hallucinations due to altitude sickness. But when the recovery team went back up Raven's Peak, they found something strange. No tower, no cabin, no debris, just scorched earth in a perfect circle, exactly where the structures should have been. And in the center, half buried in ash, was my camera. Inside were only 3 photos, all identical. All of me, sleeping, inside the cabin. Weeks passed before I returned to work. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even in daylight, even in crowds. My reflection in windows lagged behind, just slightly, like it was moving slower. One evening, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a data card, old Forest Service issue. It contained one short video, grainy footage from a lookout tower camera, time-stamped 3 days before my trip. The video showed the same cabin, and someone inside pacing back and forth. The face wasn't clear until the last few seconds, when the figure turned toward the camera. It was me, the real me, wearing the same clothes, same jacket, but his eyes were completely black. Then the screen flickered, and a new message appeared in white text. He never left. The file deleted itself instantly. It's been 8 months since Raven's Peak. I've moved twice, changed jobs, even changed my name. But I still get the same dream. I'm back in the cabin. The fire is burning. The radio hisses softly. I turn toward the window and see fog pressing against the glass like a living thing. Then a hand, black and thin, rests gently on my shoulder. When I wake up, my shoulder is freezing cold. Last night, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. No message, just a file named ravenreturns.mp4. I haven't opened it, but sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still hear the static whisper. He's still outside. It was late September when I decided to take the back roads through Oregon. The highway was under repair, and my GPS suggested a shortcut through the wilderness. It looked simple enough. Winding forest roads, a few wooden bridges, and miles of silence. I was fine with that. After weeks of noise in the city, I needed quiet. By the time the sun began to fade, I was deep in pine country. The trees were thick, swallowing the sky. My tires crunched on gravel, and the radio lost signal. Eventually, I reached a narrow wooden bridge, the kind you only see in forgotten places. A rusted sign read, Hollow Creek Crossing. I stopped for a minute, stepping out into the cold air. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no insects. Just the soft sound of running water beneath the bridge. I leaned on the rail, looking down, and that's when I heard it. A slow, hollow breathing sound rising from under the bridge. At first, I thought it was an echo. Maybe water moving through rocks. But it wasn't. The sound was steady, deliberate. I froze, staring into the darkness below as a chill ran up my spine. The longer I listened, the clearer it became. Slow, deep breaths, like something sleeping below. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or bear sheltering from the cold. But the sound was too rhythmic, too human. I crouched down, shining my flashlight through the gaps in the wooden planks. The beam hit the black water, and for a split second, I saw something pale move beneath the surface. It wasn't a reflection. It was skin, wrinkled and almost translucent. Suddenly, a soft splash echoed. Ripples spread outward, though nothing had fallen in. I took a step back, heart racing. Then a faint whisper drifted up from the water. A whisper that formed my name. Eli. I stumbled back toward the car, fumbling for the door handle. The whisper followed, clearer this time, like someone was just under the bridge, calling to me softly. When I finally got inside, I locked the doors and turned the key. But my headlights caught something. A wet hand, pale and long-fingered, gripping the side of the bridge. I floored the gas pedal and tore down the road, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the engine. After 10 minutes, I slowed down, convincing myself it was exhaustion, maybe even a hallucination. I'd been driving for hours. But when I checked the rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. The fog behind me wasn't still. It was moving, like it was following my car. I kept driving until I reached an old rest stop by the forest edge. One flickering street light illuminated a small wooden bench and a dusty map board. I parked under the light, trying to calm my breathing. The silence pressed in again, heavy and unnatural. That's when I heard water dripping, even though the road was dry. I got out and found small wet footprints leading from the direction I came. They stopped right behind my car. Something was following me from that bridge. I made it to a small diner an hour later, still shaken. The waitress, an older woman, noticed right away. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring me coffee. I told her what happened, about the bridge, the whisper, the hand. She froze mid-pour, then slowly put the pot down. "You said Hollow Creek?" she asked quietly. "That bridge has been closed for years. Flood took out part of the foundation back in '98. Locals say it's cursed. Folks who stop there don't always come back." My stomach turned. She went on, voice lowering to a whisper. "They say a man drowned under that bridge, tried to save his wife after their car went over. When divers found the wreck, they only recovered one body. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hand, pale and dripping, reaching for me through the fog. By morning, I decided to go back. I don't know why. Curiosity, guilt, maybe a need to prove it wasn't real. I drove until I reached the same stretch of road. The fog was even thicker this time, swirling like smoke. When I stepped out, everything was silent again. The bridge looked older now, as if it had aged overnight. The boards sagged, and the air smelled like rot. I called out, "Hello?" No answer, only the slow sound of running water below. Then came the breathing, louder, closer. I stepped forward and looked down. Something was floating just beneath the surface, a shape, human-sized, turning slowly in the current. But when I leaned closer, it opened its eyes. Those eyes were white, no pupils, no color, just milky and lifeless. Yet somehow, they looked right at me. I stumbled back, falling onto the wet boards. The thing began to rise. First, a face, bloated and pale, then long strands of black hair clinging to it like seaweed. Its mouth opened, a slow, impossible grin. And from it came my voice. "Eli?" The whisper turned into a gurgling sound, like water being sucked through lungs. I crawled backward, scrambling to my feet, when suddenly the bridge groaned. The wood beneath me began to crack, splitting apart. I bolted for my car, and behind me came a splash, something massive emerging from the water. I didn't dare look back. I drove like a madman, headlights cutting through fog that never seemed to end. My phone had no signal, my GPS froze, and every road looked the same. At one point, I thought I saw something in the ditch, a shape crawling on all fours, keeping pace with my car. It was pale and slick with mud, its hair dragging across the road. When I blinked, it was gone. By the time I reached a motel, it was past midnight. I went straight to the shower, trying to wash away the smell of damp earth that clung to my clothes. But when I looked down, muddy fingerprints were smeared across my skin. Long, thin ones. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the walls, every drip from the faucet felt alive. Around 3 a.m., I heard soft tapping on the window. 3 slow knocks, then silence. I pulled the curtain aside, nothing but darkness. But when I looked closer, I saw faint, wet handprints on the glass. That was it. I grabbed my bag and ran. When I reached the parking lot, the fog had returned, thick and cold. My car's windows were fogged from the inside. When I opened the door, a wet, rotting smell hit me. And on the passenger seat, a single strand of black hair, dripping with water. I should have left Oregon that night. But something pulled me back. Some twisted sense of unfinished business. I needed to know what that thing was. So at dawn, I returned to Hollow Creek Bridge. The fog had lifted. The water below was still. It almost looked peaceful. Then I saw the old wooden cross nailed to a tree nearby. The name carved into it made my blood run cold. Eli Harper, 1998. That was my name. Before I could even think, the water below began to ripple. A figure slowly rose, a reflection of me, only pale, swollen, and smiling. The thing that looked like me climbed onto the bridge, dripping and silent. I stepped back, frozen in terror, as it tilted its head, studying me. Then it spoke. My voice, warped and hollow. You came back. Before I could move, it lunged forward, dragging me toward the edge. The boards shattered under our weight, and the cold water swallowed everything. They found my car 3 days later, abandoned near the bridge. No one ever found my body. Locals still say Hollow Creek Bridge breathes on foggy nights, like something beneath it is waiting for someone to stop and listen. My name is Ryan Holloway, and I used to believe that Crater Lake was the most peaceful place on Earth. The way the fog rolled across that deep, still water always made me feel calm, like the world stopped for a moment. But peace isn't what I found there that night. It started as a solo camping trip in early October, just before the heavy snows began. I had a small blue tent, a lantern, and a camera I used for landscape shots. I parked my truck near a trail that led down to the southern rim, far from the tourist areas. The forest there felt ancient, moss-covered pines towering like cathedrals, roots curling through the soil like veins. That first night was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the world's holding its breath. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange humming sound. It wasn't coming from the trees or the wind. It was from the lake. A low, pulsing vibration, almost mechanical but oddly organic, like something alive was beneath the surface. When I unzipped my tent and looked out, I saw it. 3 perfect circles of light hovering above the water, glowing faintly blue. They weren't reflections. They were moving, slow, synchronized, and impossibly smooth. That was the moment I should have packed up and left. But I didn't. I took my camera and stepped closer to the edge. The lights moved in a slow, rhythmic pattern, almost like they were breathing. Every few seconds, they'd pulse brighter, sending faint ripples across the water. I lifted my camera and zoomed in, trying to capture it. But the lens fogged instantly, as if the air itself rejected being recorded. The humming grew louder, deep enough to rattle in my chest. The lights began to rise, not like aircraft, but like something floating in thick liquid. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they shot upward, vanishing into the fog. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes, waiting for something to move, for any sign that I wasn't dreaming. Then the forest behind me whispered. Not the wind, an actual whisper. My name. Ryan. I spun around, flashlight sweeping through the mist. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. But the whisper came again, closer this time, right behind me. I ran back to my tent, zipped it up, and sat there with my flashlight on, shaking. The hum had stopped, but my heartbeat felt synced to it. Steady, slow, unnatural. That night, I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I convinced myself it was exhaustion or stress. I packed up my gear, ready to leave. But when I reached my truck, I froze. There were wet footprints leading from the lake to where I'd parked, human-sized, bare, and spaced too far apart to be normal walking. I looked around, but the fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Then a figure appeared, standing still in the mist, right near the tree line. He looked like a ranger, green jacket, hat, tall. But something about his posture was wrong. Too stiff, too still. I called out, "Hey, you okay out there?" No answer. He didn't move, not even when I waved my arm. I took one cautious step forward. The fog thinned just enough to reveal his face. Only, it wasn't a face. It was smooth, like clay. No mouth, no eyes, nothing. I stumbled back, terrified, but in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The air turned colder instantly, and that low hum returned, vibrating through my bones. Something was wrong with this place. Deeply wrong. I made it to a small ranger outpost about 30 minutes away. A man named Carter was working the morning shift. I told him everything. The lights, the footprints, the faceless man. He didn't laugh. He just listened quietly. Then sighed. "You shouldn't camp near the lake's south rim," he said. "Locals don't go there after dark." "Why not?" I asked. He hesitated. "You've heard of the disappearances, right?" "The ones they never found?" I hadn't. He nodded grimly. "People vanish every few years. Tourists, hikers, even rangers. No tracks, no signs, just gone. And some of us think it's got something to do with them." "Them?" He looked out the window toward the lake. "Lights. Always the lights first, then the humming, then nothing." He told me to leave before nightfall. I promised I would, but curiosity had its claws in me. I had proof on my camera, or so I thought. When I checked the footage that night, it was gone. The memory card was blank, wiped clean. That's when the lights came back. I should have listened. But something about the lights called to me. They hovered just above the waterline, reflecting perfectly on the lake's surface. I found myself walking toward them again, camera forgotten in my pocket. Every step felt heavier. The air thickened, the sound deepened, now more like a heartbeat than a hum. I reached the edge of a cliff that overlooked the lake, and that's when I saw them clearly. 3 figures standing on the water. Perfectly still, silhouettes framed in blue light. They were tall, too tall to be human, their limbs long and jointed in strange ways. When one of them turned its head toward me, the hum stopped. For a full minute, everything went dead silent. Then the sky tore open, a burst of blue light blinding me. I fell backward, covering my eyes. When the light faded, they were gone. But on the ground beside me was something metallic, small, and ice cold. A circular piece, like a coin, etched with symbols I couldn't read. I held that strange metal disc in my hand, my breath fogging in the icy air. It was perfectly smooth on one side and covered in small engravings on the other, circles within circles, intersecting lines like constellations. When I touched it with my bare fingers, it vibrated faintly, almost as if something inside it was alive. I stuffed it into my pocket and headed back toward my truck. But the forest wasn't the same. The air shimmered like heat rising from pavement, and every sound, the wind, the crunch of leaves, was distorted, echoing backward. I reached my truck and froze. The headlights were already on. Someone was inside. I slowly stepped closer, and my reflection appeared in the glass, but it wasn't moving when I did. It blinked at me first. I stumbled back, panic gripping my chest. Then the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the driver's seat was wet, puddled with lake water. My camera was sitting on the dashboard, lens cracked. When I turned it on, the screen flickered to life for just a second, showing a frame of something standing behind my tent the night before. It wasn't a man. It was tall, thin, with glowing eyes and limbs bending the wrong way. The next second, the camera died completely. I dropped it, started the engine, and drove, fast, reckless, down the mountain road. But no matter how far I went, the hum followed me. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment in Portland, hours away. I slammed the door, locked every bolt, and sat in silence. The world felt wrong. When I looked out my window, I saw faint blue light flashing behind the clouds, like lightning, but rhythmic. I took the metal disc out of my pocket and placed it on my kitchen table. It was pulsing softly, glowing faintly in sync with the flashes outside. That's when my phone buzzed, an unknown number. When I answered, the line hissed with static before a voice spoke. My own voice. You shouldn't have taken it. I dropped the phone. The lights in my apartment flickered, and the same hum from the lake began to vibrate through the walls. I ran to grab the disc, but it was gone. The table was soaked, a small puddle spreading outward, like something had melted through it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my car, parked miles away, staring at the empty seat beside me, where drops of water slowly formed, one by one. I must have blacked out. When I woke up, the sun was rising. My watch said 7:30 a.m., but my phone said Friday. I'd left the lake on Tuesday. 3 days, gone. I rushed home, panicking. My apartment looked different. Things were rearranged. My coffee mug was filled, still steaming. Someone, or something, had been there. Then I saw the note on my table. It was written in perfect handwriting. Mine. Return it to the water. I didn't remember writing it, but when I touched the paper, that same vibration pulsed through my fingers. My body went cold. I grabbed my keys and drove back to Crater Lake, heart hammering. As I got closer, my vision started to blur. Every radio station played static, and sometimes, through the noise, I heard faint whispers, overlapping voices calling my name. By the time I reached the rim, the fog had returned, thicker than ever. The hum was deafening now. The lake glowed faintly blue. I stumbled down toward the water's edge. The air tasted metallic, sharp. My breath came out in bursts of fog that twisted unnaturally before disappearing. The disc was waiting for me, half buried in the dirt, glowing softly. I picked it up, and instantly, the world went silent. No wind, no sound, just absolute void. Then I saw them again, the 3 lights hovering above the lake, brighter this time, descending slowly toward the surface. The ground trembled under my feet. My vision blurred as the lights merged into one massive beam, reflecting off the water like a mirror. Inside that light, I saw shapes. Human, but not. Dozens of them, moving, twisting, reaching upward as if trying to escape. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The hum wasn't outside anymore. It was inside me, vibrating in my chest, syncing with my heartbeat. I dropped the disc into the water. The beam flared, swallowing everything in white light. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the shore. The fog was gone. The lake was still again, silent as glass. It was dawn, pink light spreading across the water like nothing had happened. But I wasn't alone. On the opposite shore stood a figure, tall, thin, motionless, watching. It slowly lifted its arm and pointed toward me. I blinked, and it was gone. When I got back to my truck, the engine started perfectly. My camera, though, was sitting on the passenger seat, cleaned, repaired, and turned on. On the screen was a single video file labeled Return. I pressed play. It was me, standing at the edge of the lake, staring up at the lights. Behind me, the tall figures watched silently. But in the reflection of the water, my face wasn't mine. I haven't gone back to Crater Lake since. But every night when I close my eyes, I hear that low hum return, slow, pulsing, patient. And sometimes, in the distance, I see faint blue light glowing through the clouds. Maybe they never left. Maybe they're waiting for me to come back. The wind of Oregon carries more than mist. It carries whispers. Whispers of things that never die, only hide. From the haunted wilderness to the lonely roads, every shadow, every silence tells us something. That evil doesn't always need a face. Sometimes, it's just the feeling that you're being watched. The sound you can't explain, the cold breath on your neck when you're all alone. Each of these stories, though told by different people, shares one terrifying truth. Oregon remembers. The land itself seems to hold grudges, to breathe the memories of those who vanished, and to echo the screams that were never heard. If you ever find yourself wandering through the forests of Oregon at night, don't follow the voices. Don't look into the fog, and whatever you do, never stop to listen, because the moment you do, you might just become the next story whispered by the wind. This is Mr. Dark Knight, signing off. Until next time, sleep tight, if you can.